Hi, friends, from my living room to yours. My name is Mary from the Lighthouse Bookshop, and I'm just here to welcome you to today's launch of Harry Connor's absolutely gorgeous I Shall Never Fall in Love, which is a gorgeous graphic novel, a Regency romance, a retelling of Jane Austen, a tale of friendship, and so many other things. You are going to fall in love with George and Eleanor and Charlotte, just like we did. And do watch along. Thank you to Harry and to the brilliant Lex Croucher for being our host today. And make sure that at the end you order yourself a copy of the books, because we have some very snazzy book plates from Harry as well. Enjoy your evening.
Hello, my name is Lex Croucher. I am the author of When an Art Not in Love and some other books. And I am so excited to be talking to Harry Connor about their new graphic novel, I Shall Never Fall in Love, which is out now. Harry, I'm going to read a little intro of you, if you don't mind.
That's fine. Go ahead.
You're like, I will allow it this time. Okay. Harry is an award-winning author and illustrator based in Scotland, and their game books include Any Nominated Into the Dungeon, and their comics include multi-award-winning webcomic Finding Home. I'm going to be asking Harry some questions, and then we'll be answering some questions from readers. My first question is, how are you?
I'm all
How you doing?
right. I was gonna say I really like the Gwen and Art cover, like next to.
They look
There's like
really good
a
together. I
yeah, there's
literally,
a really nice.
yeah, just before I started recording, I was holding the book and then like your book, and then I just put it there. And I was like, wow, they look so stunning
Nice.
together. Coordinated, almost as if it was on
Yeah.
purpose, even though it was not. Anyway, how are you?
I think yeah, I'm good. I'm very excited to be talking to you. I'm excited to be doing an event with Lighthouse. I love Lighthouse books. It's very
Me
exciting and
too.
cool for me. Yeah.
Cool.
Um,
Um,
I
no, you
I
go.
was only gonna say because I just wanted to praise Lighthouse because being very disabled, I often like can't do things in person. I'm like immune compromised, and Lighthouse has lots of really great like online stuff and like masking and things in place, which is means a massive amount to me. And also sometimes my friends' books do launches there. I love you, Lighthouse. That's all. It's me being a fan of the bookshop really quickly
We
up
love
front.
Lighthouse. Huge
Yeah.
Lighthouse fan. Whenever I go to Edinburgh, in fact, I had to get off a train in Edinburgh, and I had about 35 minutes till my next train, and I just ran to Lighthouse, just ran
Must have
straight
been a
back.
sprint. Yeah.
It was a little bit of a sprint, yeah. But I wanted to make the most of my little stopover. I'm going to start out with like a really easy and casual question, which is, when did you start creating art?
Ooh, I think it depends on what you mean by art. I
Listen,
feel
anything is art.
yeah, I think like a lot of comics people, I was drawing when I was like 4. I was very serious when I was really young. I was like, I'm making a book actually, and it took quite a long time for that to have um to sort of be maybe worth showing to people. I did a lot of like comics in class. I used to I realized that graphics novels existed when I was maybe like 13 or 14. There was like a new bookshelf at the library, and I was like, oh, I want to do that, obviously. It's comics but long. It's like the thing I like about books, but also comics. And so I drew in the back of classes. I did like 200-page across several notebook fantasy romance epics and passed them around class so people would read them in installments.
Oh my
So
God,
then naturally got into webcomics. Sorry.
you're like the Dickens of your school.
Uh, I think by the end, it was normally like one person was still reading it, but that was enough for
That's all you
me. I was
need. One
very
super fan.
motivated. Yeah, exactly. Um, so like a long time, too long, perhaps.
I mean, I used to make little books. I used to just copy Jacqueline Wilson, and I used to like write sad books about kids. And I would just like, this was when I was probably like 8 or something, and I would just fold pieces of paper and like staple them. And I would do illustrations. It was very bad. It was almost always about going camping. I don't know why these kids were having such a sad time going camping, but they were.
Well, I feel like sad time going camping is sort of the premise of Finding Home, which is like my big webcomic. Um, yeah, I think, and I also think that like just stapling your own thing. Like that's what zine fairs are. That's indie comics,
Mm.
actually. I think you'll find.
I think
It's
maybe
been
then
doing it for ages.
I was a
Yeah,
young comics
you were
artist.
in
I've lost
there.
my way. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that the webcomics was quite like a natural step, like some slightly more efficient way to like show people what I was doing.
Mm.
And I was started doing them more seriously maybe 10 years ago,
Amazing. Was there
which
any like
is
particular
a long time.
comic that inspired you or anything? Like, was there anybody, I know you said you saw the shelf at school, but was there like anything you remember?
Um, I think that it's difficult to answer because there's so many
Yeah.
answers. I really read like a lot. I was really like a fantasy book nerd kid and adult. And you know, like uh, Bunny versus Monkey is like by Jamie Smart, and it's like the biggest book in co children's comics at the moment. But he was already doing like center page things in the kids bit of the Sunday Times when I was a teenager. And my nan used to buy the Sunday Times because she knew I liked comics and take out the pages and like post them to me.
That's so
And so
nice.
I was like genuinely very inspired by those, but also just like Tintin and like the Beano
Mm.
and like Simpsons comics, just kind of anything and everything, I think. Um, yeah, and I think being surrounded by lots of other people for the last 10 years anyway, doing like indie comics and zine fairs, it was so encouraging because it just felt like, oh, I could just do it now. It didn't feel like I had to wait to be better. And I think that just doing the comics is like a way of improving and also just having a lot of fun with it instead of being I still get this now, right? If I'm too critical at a really early stage, that's like not what really helps an idea
No.
grow. So I think that's maybe my favorite thing about the kind of indie comics scene.
I was doing like fan fiction and stuff. It's like
Mm.
having support community where everyone's like really excited for each other and like just genuinely really happy to read each other's writing and stuff is very nice.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes I read like a debut like queer romance book and the writing is so good that I'm like part of me is like, I think this person has been doing fan fiction for 10 years with
Oh my
like a
God.
circle of people who were like all
Yeah.
working together and getting so good.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
I have friends who were like big in different like fandoms with fan fiction who now are like, you know, huge authors. And when I read their first drafts, they're completely clean. And I'm like, the
Yeah.
reason why your first draft has not a single typo in it, not a single error, is because you're used to just like writing a chapter and then posting it online like
Yeah.
almost immediately. And I'm in
Yeah.
awe of those people because that has not actually translated to how I write at all.
I think something about webcomics is you have to do them. They're just so comics are so much work to just draw them after
Mm,
you've like written what's going to happen. So I think it's sometimes a bit faster. So one really big difference about going from webcomics to um big publisher graphic novels is that I was used to posting a page and someone would be like, you forgot this character's earring on this panel. And I'd be like, oh, thank you. Okay, I'll go and add it back in. And now I'm like scouring. Like, obviously, there's like copy edits and stuff that actually were really good with that. But it made me like more scared that I would be like,
yeah.
the typos, no one would catch them, which obviously like wasn't really true. But I feel like they have to be really clean. What if the editors know I've missed out an earring?
Well, that's the thing, right? Like when I first started writing books, I was like, I don't want to be embarrassed by making mistakes in front of people. It's like those people are there to see the mistakes and
I
like help
know.
them. But I was like, well, I can't let them see that. It makes me
I'm trying
ever.
to get better at that, I think. Yeah.
Oh, it feels really embarrassing. Anyway, you have already started answering some more of my questions because you
Oh,
just
sorry.
no, it's fine. It's like one mind sharing one brain cell. Sorry, you probably have more than one brain cell. I only have
No,
the
no,
one
no.
brain cell.
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
One of my questions was just to go back to the experience of posting comics online. You said that that was like really helpful for you. Was it entirely a positive experience? Like, do you recommend that to everybody who wants to start start in comics and graphic novels?
I think the webcomic scene is quite, not to get too like inside baseball immediately, but the webcomic scene is quite different now from when it was
Mm,
10 years ago. a lot of people, when I talk to uni students who are studying comics, they want to get big on webtoons because that's what webcomics is to them. And it's quite like particular about like if your comic has swearing in it, it's like pushed into more mature categories. They've recently added that. There's like quite a lot of pressure to go really fast, and even people who are being paid by the website. It's a lot. There's a lot of pressure. I think there used to be more like just sort of post like whatever you want to do. I do think that like making comics in some form, just like trying it out and trying like short stuff and long stuff if you want to, is like the best way to get into it.
Yeah.
Um, but I think I'm also like very pro like little local events if you can get to them, or like sharing with friends, or having a like you can set up webcomics on like a WordPress or a Tumblr. There's been a bit of a movement of people back into slightly more old internet stuff so that it doesn't have to be in quite the format or with the kind of restrictions that some of the big commercial websites have. That was a really long answer. What was the
No,
question?
it's really
Please
interesting because I
recommend.
think the whole internet has gone this way, right? Where like things used to be for fun and like small communities, and then as things have turned to like hustle culture and everything has to be like about kind of I don't know, like I experienced the same thing when I used to make YouTube videos, which is that like YouTube used to be a small community of people who were just like hanging out and creating for fun. And you couldn't even monetize your videos back then. Like it was all just for free and everybody was
Mm,
just chilling and trying to like make community and like find friends and like improve their craft if they were doing craft. I wasn't doing craft, I was doing video blogs. And then it just completely changed because once it becomes a thing where everyone's like trying to make a career out of it or make money and it just changes the vibe. Like it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a different energy. So it's interesting to know that people are going
yeah.
back to smaller community and
I,
stuff.
I feel like it's such an exciting like democratization of like there are like
Mm.
webcomics that really blow up and get picked up by publishers and stuff, and that's really exciting. But also the sort of commercialization of it, very understandable. But
Yeah.
yeah, definitely a change in vibe, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean it is also a good thing, obviously, because it just means that like especially in well, I don't really know how the comics and graphic novel industry works, but yeah, I assume that like it used to be very hard to get into, and maybe now it's like I mean I assume it's still very hard to get into, but now there's maybe a couple more avenues in.
Yeah, to be honest, I think a lot of people making graphic novels have come from something else and have been doing a lot of their own things on their own. Um, yeah, I'm trying not to like launch into like a huge sort of discussion about it. Um, yeah, I mean, also like graphic novels have got much bigger because people can see the success of webcomics and they're like, oh, people like reading comics. They like reading a lot more different genres of comics. And even just like imported manga and lots of other things, I think have kind of opened up what genres like mainstream publishing thinks are like people are interested in.
Yes.
Even though as a reader, I've always been interested in that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. You talked about your kind of experience with like being copy edited and also like the speed with which you kind of do things. But what have, if any, are there like any other major differences between being kind of self-published and more in control and moving to a traditional publisher with a graphic novel?
There actually haven't been that many for me. The big webcomic that I did, I self-published as graphic novels, was like a series of graphic novels. So, and I hired an editor. So the way I was doing it, because I kind of love books and graphic novels, was pretty similar. Apart
Right.
from that, you there was more editing support for the entire thing right from the beginning. Um, but yeah, just not actually all that different. Really? No.
Interesting. Because I feel like it's very, very different when it comes to non-graphic novels, you know, the other novels that don't have that don't have the pictures. um, but I guess it depends, doesn't it? I think like the experience of somebody who is like maybe at a smaller press, for example, but traditionally published, and the experience of somebody who is self-published, but as you said, kind of like hiring people and working with them is probably relatively similar as well.
Yeah,
Um,
and also the game books that I do are a small publisher, so I've done
yes.
layouts and covers, and I've worked with illustration clients, and I'm sort of
Yeah.
surprised. every little thing came back in, and I really liked doing like little like bookmarks and like graphics and stuff. And a lot of that is like just things that I can still be doing. Self-publishing just means doing all of the trying to do all of the jobs yourself, maybe not very well. I love not having to write press releases for myself.
Oh my God,
I
yeah, that
was
sounds
I got my editor to help me because that was hellish. So that's very nice and exciting.
yeah.
There's a change.
In terms of the novel itself, have you always loved historical fiction? Like, what's the interest in historical for you?
Yeah, I think I grew up in like my parents were watching like BBC period dramas when I
Mhm.
was growing up for sure. So I almost thought it was a thing. I was like, yeah, everyone knows about those, which I maybe realized is like not the case with quite a lot of my friends. Um, I think that not to answer a completely different question, but when I was
Sure.
a teenager, there's something about the really repressed
Mm,
romance, especially in those like I think there's some quite like really exciting new, more modern like style period dramas happening like now
mhm.
and in the last 10 years. But some of the stuff from like the 90s and the noughties is quite close to like, I don't know, an original book or the original kind of vibe, which is really repressed. And there's a lot of like society won't let these people be together, but there's like the glance across the room or like the tiny hand touch is a really big deal. And I think being a queer teenager who felt like I couldn't be out in public, like girlfriends that wouldn't hold my hand in public because they're worried about what people might say. And like, I think a lot of that stuff felt really resonant.
Mm,
Um, I think like in my mind, there's like a kind of a link between like queer like how open you can be about your emotions in public and some of those stories that I really liked when I was younger, like having a really big emotion and like not being able to express it. That's
yes.
also kind of like it's kind of I saw someone saying that it was like kind of the kink of a lot of Regency romance is like someone really repressed and buttoned up, but is like so overwhelmed by emotion that like or like lust or whatever that it like breaks them
Yeah.
completely. Um, and it's maybe not exactly the same thing, but I think there's like, I think those all link up in an interesting way in my mind anyway.
No, I totally agree with you. I am on the same page with you there. I also think it's funny when like uh I think there are some people who would like think that they're not into any kind of kink at all and wouldn't understand and like wouldn't kind of like see that as in any way like oh it's just very interesting to me. It's very interesting.
Yeah,
Um
the line between like a very intense romance dynamic or it's like it's still being very desperately into one very
yeah,
specific vibe. And I think actually lots of
totally.
people are when they think about romance fiction. So
Oh yeah. I mean, I have a lot of conversations with my friends about how a lot of the popular contemporary romance right now um is a lot of this kind of like heterosexual, like very big man, very tiny lady. And I'm like, that's kink, my friend. I'm sorry, but it just is. Anyway, not to completely derail this conversation.
I think it's all
Um,
relevant. Yeah.
yeah, it's relevant. Were there any particular challenges when it came to bringing the Regency to life on the page? Because I saw that you made a video about learning to draw horses. Was it mainly the horses that were the problem?
Horses really are like the bane of my life. I'm like not really, I think some people are really good at like animal drawing, and that's
Mm,
like not my thing. And horses are this sort of hard level. I feel like doing only fantasy and historical. There's always horses and carriages. The carriages are pretty bad as well, actually. I went in person to like this carriage museum, which is wheelchair accessible and has like a outdoor. It was like really close to where I was living with my family at the time, like randomly. And I think it kind of really helped to just like see it in real life and like
mm,
take a bunch of different photos from different angles. I
yeah.
think there's such a big difference between writing in the script like a Regency ball seen from above and then being like, no, no, you really need to know what that looks like. So I also it's really easy to like you just draw a chair and it looks like a chair from IKEA. Like that the default chair in your head as a cartoonist is like a particular style, but that is world building, right? So if you just draw like a table and it's not really a Regency table, it's like missing a chance for it to feel like it's in the space. And I'm also very into like I guess environmental storytelling, like saying something about the character through their space and their stuff and how it's organized. So the two main characters have very different houses, and it was like in the original pitch for this, as I was like, I've got a vision. This character wants everything to be perfect, and it's going to be late 1700s, Marie Antoinette vibe, Wes Anderson, pastel colors. She's in denial about her problems, and also so is the house. And it's
I
like,
love that. So is the house.
yeah, and she's like, and her mum died when she was young, so she's kind of got this, she wants to keep it the same. She's really
Yeah.
got this idea of like what her mum was like and wants stuff to be like that. Um, and the other character's house is actually like Tudor. I just wanted it to be like old money, but really falling apart.
Yes.
And yeah, and I think that people reading the book, you don't need to be like, wow, a Jacobean archway when you're looking at
Oh,
it
but that's
to
what
get
I
like,
think.
yeah, well, I think probably there are some people out there who were like, wow, that is not what a bonnet would look like in the 1810s, like no matter how hard I try.
No, but
Um,
it's all, I have to say, I went to a Regency ball like 2 weeks ago, and it's usually not what you expect, right? It's like, I think people just imagine that it's the costumes from like Pride and Prejudice 2005 and everybody's in white muslin, and like the Regency had such a wide range
yeah,
of clothing that if you're looking at the beginning of the Regency towards the end of the Regency, it's like just completely different. Like everything about it.
yes,
Like, I mean, the waist line kind of goes up and down a little bit, but stays in the same kind of zone for dresses. But yeah, it is the stuff that I saw with my eyes. I was like, some of this you would never expect it was Regency, but these people take accuracy very seriously. Anyway, sorry, I just interrupted you. Continue, please.
no, it's really interesting. And I also think talking to lots of different publishers when this was like being pitched around the UK was so interesting because I would be talking to people, and by the end of the conversation, I would know whether they were like an Austen nerd or like a Haya, Georgette Haya.
Oh
How
yeah,
do
I
you
don't know
say
how you
her
say it.
name?
I'd say Haya,
Um,
but I could be wrong.
okay, I'll go with Haya. Or like they just love the 90s Pride and Prejudice, or occasionally I think like there are Regency nerds who actually just love the Napoleonic Wars and want to drink wine, which is like not me completely. But it's a little um yeah, I think it's quite interesting to think about this stuff like outside what you would immediately think about. Apart from it means I looked up a lot of like engravings from the time. I was like, this view of London is gonna look like London did. I actually I showed it to my dad, who is an art historian, and he was like, I showed him one picture because I was like, maybe if anyone's gonna recognize this, and he was like, oh, that's Regent Street, and I was like, yeah, he like recognized the drawing was Regent Street in like 1800, which
That's
is
very
cool.
impressive. Oh my God. Well, I'm
Yeah,
not that
writing for my.
well.
I don't think he's really not really a comics person, but that one panel, I was like, my one fan, my dad, can know that that was accurate. Um, yeah, I think I just liked I wanted the vibe to feel right so that you
Yeah.
truly don't need to know anything about it. And I think as well, you don't even need to be a big nerd for the era. I quite like that when you've
Yeah.
drawn a picture of it, you get the like facial expressions and the body language, and you can sort of see that like, oh, this house is all like dark wood paneling. It looks intimidating. It looks old. It looks fancy. And you don't necessarily need to know, like in a novel you might have to like look up what the words are, right, if you're not really familiar with the time period. And
Yeah.
I like the idea anyway that like, especially if maybe like younger people are reading it, or just people it's not their normal genre, might be able to like, you can kind of pick up on what's happening because you've got all these visuals to give
Yeah.
you a sort of sense of what is going on, which is something I
I,
like about historical comics.
I think a lot of it is about atmosphere because um I do quite a lot of research, but you wouldn't know it from the books that I write because so much of the time I don't include it, or I throw out anything that is not relevant, or I go, actually the joke is funnier if I use like a more modern kind of like turn of phrase in
Oh
the
yeah,
and most people don't mind. Some people really do mind. But I think for me, like one of the main draws of the Regency is like how clearly everybody has the Regency in their imagination. And even though a lot of the
yeah,
that's not necessarily like completely accurate or whatever, it's about the vibes. Like most people would kind of go, oh, here, you know, they could say 5 things that they think about the Regency era, and it would be kind of vaguely true. I do kind of like that it exists in people's kind of group imagination as this like specific time. And that means, as you said, you don't need to know necessarily all of the details. You can still like drop into something that's set in the Regency and go like, oh, okay, I know basically what's happening here. Like I'm at a ball. I know
Yeah.
the vibes.
I'm so interested in the way that it exists in the cultural imagination, like almost separate. I feel like Jane Austen does, right? There's a lot of you get books that are like kind of like a Mr. Darcy hero, and sometimes they just mean like a grumpy man.
Yeah.
Like it's removed itself. Like I think most people like have probably like heard the name, like kind of have a sense of like, oh yeah, okay, Mr. Darcy, I guess,
Yeah.
which is like quite a long way, maybe from what the original like book is. And
Yeah.
I think also because Austen is so big, there's a lot of like analysis that is quite accessible, which I really, really like.
Mm.
I'm not very good at understanding. I think I just can't really like pick up history sometimes if I'm reading something really dense. So actually what I did is a lot of reading like essays about Austen that talk about it in historical context. So like I found it difficult to understand what like enclosure was, as in the way that agricultural land changed between like 1600 and 1900. And then I read a little like essay at the beginning of a Emma edition that was like, here's what enclosure is in relation to Mr.
Mm.
Knightley. And I was suddenly like, somehow now that there's a story attached to it, I'm like interested. If I can imagine real people in the space and what they're doing day to day, that is so much more understandable to me than like dates or like figures or any of that stuff. Um, yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. This is like when I studied Latin. This is just like this. I studied Latin for 1 year. I was not at a fancy school, to be very clear. It was 1 year, and everyone's always like, "Why did you study Latin?" I'm like, I have no idea. And the book, the Latin textbook, you're just learning like the dog is in the street. The woman is, I don't know, doing something terrible probably because she had a bad life. And then at the end, sorry, this is a spoiler for the Latin textbook that I read. At the end, it turns out that they're living in Pompeii and Vesuvius erupts. And so like you've been like traveling along with the story of these characters, but you thought it was just like a textbook. So you're like, oh yes, now this person is going to the market. Now this person is having this conversation. And then at the end, they all die horribly. And suddenly I was like, I now care deeply about these characters.
I think I know. I think I know the textbook you mean.
Got
I
King
went to fancy
Cogidubnus in
school
it.
on a I went to a fancy school on a scholarship and did a year of Latin, and my friends and partner tease me about it when I'm occasionally like, oh, do you think this word means this? And I'm like, oh fuck, that's Latin.
I've
That's
revealed
because of
that I
Latin.
once studied about Hycelius in this
Yeah,
textbook.
yeah.
Oh my God. Anyway, sorry, I'm just always thinking about King Cogidubnus and the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Um, are there any specific houses that made it into the book that exist in real life, or were you kind of just drawing on inspiration from lots of different places?
I really think I should have done that. And instead, I was like, I will look up 10 different houses built between these years and I will make my own based on exactly what I wanted to do,
Oh my
which feels,
God.
in retrospect, like a mistake. And I shouldn't have done that. But I keep doing it because I'm like, I see quite a lot of different things that I want to incorporate different parts of.
Yeah.
And sometimes, man, I think the house that was in the 90s Pride and Prejudice went on sale like while I was doing this book, and sometimes you can get tours around the inside, and a lot of like really old fancy houses, like people haven't really updated what the interiors look like. And I also really kind of enjoyed doing that. I think I'm often trying to cobble together a lot of different things. So no is the answer. I made it much too difficult for myself.
I was gonna say you made it way harder on yourself because what
Yeah,
I
okay.
often do, I mean, the thing is I don't have to draw it, obviously. I describe it and most people won't be able to picture a particular house. Even somebody who has gone to every National Trust property in the UK probably wouldn't be able to recognize the houses that I'm describing because I'm just describing little vague parts, unless I'm like this very specific piece of
Hmm.
art or piece of sculpture or whatever. But it is very useful. I think like the way that I normally do it is that I take a house and then I get to like give it little extensions based on what I need, or like just change it a little bit, update it for the purposes of my
Yeah.
my book.
I think sometimes I've written a scene in the script in a room, and then I've got to drawing it, and I'm like, oh, that's gonna be a little the house is gonna be a little bit bigger than I thought because there is not a room that this makes any sense for. I have to like retroactively go back and like change it.
Well, I was gonna
I was
say
actually
like, sorry, go on.
I was gonna change to a different topic. All I was gonna say is that like yeah, no.
Okay.
I think you can tell. I think you can tell when someone's got a clear idea of what it looks like,
Yeah.
or they're describing something. I think you can tell. And when you were like, "Oh, people can't tell that I've done this research," like, I think you can tell because you sometimes read a historical thing that is like floating. Like there is
Hmm.
no. It's really difficult, and I don't think it's as tangible as being like I can imagine being in this corridor. I think that often. Like the point of doing like a lot of character sketches or like I figured out what the room plan of the house is or whatever is just so that in the actual thing it feels like atmospheric and real. So I
Yeah.
think that a lot of the extra research like will come in a little bit, and also there'll be like some nerds like me reading your book being like, oh yeah, okay.
Oh,
But I
really?
know what you mean that there's like sometimes I was like they wouldn't use this word like I can't do a like okay, but I was like but the joke is funnier, so it's a lot of like figuring out what a good middle point is.
I love that you said okay, because that was the number one thing that I had to remove from like my first ever book. Because I was like, I like the word okay. I think it's fun. And they were
Yeah.
like, well, it didn't exist. And I was like, oh, fine, whatever.
I've got
And
like one okay, which I was like, it's a joke and it's allowed in,
oh, well,
please.
I mean, if it's a joke, I just care more about jokes. That's the thing. I'm always like, if it's funnier, okay. What I was gonna say is that I often I see things very cinematically when I'm writing, but
Mm.
I don't have to draw it, so no one else sees what I'm seeing. And obviously then I can just describe whichever bits kind of suit my whims. And so often I then realize later on that like nothing makes sense. Like the way that the house is linked up and stuff, like even the way that a room is set out, I'm like, they're sitting by a window, and in my head, the door's over here, and then they cross to the door, whatever. But then later on, it wouldn't really make sense for the window to be there. But it doesn't matter because nobody is seeing exactly how I'm seeing it. And the problem comes when I've been lucky enough to have a couple of like maps and illustrations at the beginnings of my books, which is very exciting for me, a person who can only draw horses. That's the only thing I can draw. And
Oh,
I was just obsessed with drawing horses when I was a kid. I actually can't draw them anymore because I bragged about the fact that I could draw horses. So someone said, draw a horse in the big, like in the front of your new book for me. And I did. And it was like honestly the worst thing that anyone's ever drawn. It was sort of just like a tube with like a, anyway, it doesn't
I
matter.
think you can get back into it though. I think there's muscle memory. If you're like
Probably.
one of the people who can draw horses, I think you can like slip back in. Like,
I can like totally picture it. I got the neck wrong, but it's like I remember how I used to do it. This is me doing like neck, ear, head, snout, and then I
I'm
felt
really,
it.
really bad at, I can't really visualize things before I've drawn them. So it'll come out on the page. I can be quite confident. And then as it comes out, I'm like, I
You're
remember
like,
now. I
oh
don't know how
dear.
to draw horses. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, maybe I'll get back into it. Yeah, what I was gonna say is that when people do maps and illustrations for me, then I suddenly have to go, oh, well, this thing is here, and then I go, hang on, this doesn't make any sense. So like we had to do a whole
It's,
castle, and it was like,
yeah, yeah. That's so funny because I feel like I'm doing that, but it's with myself. It's just me that's created my own problems. I like will design the room and then have to like go back to the script and be like, wait, 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 wait. It's like you'd think it would be different, but no,
no, well,
done
that's
it
good
to
to know. It's
myself.
not just me doing this. It sounds like it's like, but then I make it other people's problem, and you make it your own problem. So there you go. That's the difference.
Can't
Um,
even complain. Yeah.
Out of all the characters in this book, who was your favorite to draw and who was your favorite to write, please?
Ooh. I for some reason I always end up with a character that is easier for me to draw than other people, and I feel like George was easier to draw than everyone else. Also, I care more about menswear; it just interests me more. So
Yeah.
that was more interesting for me to draw because it's like the kind of thing that I think looks cool and would like to wear. Um, I don't know. I liked writing Charlotte a lot. There's quite a lot of like, and also like minor secondary characters that barely come into it that I had fun writing and then also getting to draw because every time you draw someone that you haven't necessarily got like fully fleshed out, you're giving them personality through every bit of body
Mm,
language or their facial reactions to like what's happening with the main characters.
yeah.
So I always get too attached to basically all my secondary characters.
I love that. I do that as well, especially because I think secondary characters often just get to kind of, because you don't get to spend so much time with them, you get to have them come in and kind of, they really have to like be who they are very kind of obviously, because you're not going
Mm,
to get the whole book to like get to know them. So I often feel like I get to kind of give them really good one-liners, or like there's just some way that they have to make themselves very known in the small amount of time that they have kind of on the page. Which
yeah.
is fun.
I think for drawing them, it's also something where it's like an extra bit of creativity later in the
Mm,
process because the script is done really early, and
yeah.
then sometimes the facial expressions is like, oh, I could like I have a different angle on who this person is like each time because it goes through like roughs and then pencils and like each different stage you can kind of have a slightly different take on like, ooh, I think I'm adding this to this secondary character.
Nice. So I felt like the main Austen influence on this was obviously Emma. I'm just like, I'm like, obviously, and then I'm like, what if you were like, no, actually, you've completely misinterpreted. But did you kind of like, what was your process like that? Like with kind of like taking the book, and it's not an obviously like a kind of retelling. It's more kind of like a, well, I don't know. What do you class it as? I'm not going to put words.
Yeah, I've been calling it an Austen mashup because I think if I read a like retelling of Emma, I would be opening it up being like, which one's Jane?
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
don't think you
Yeah.
can necessarily do that with this. And it's got
No.
quite, I think that the next thing that it's got most of it in is Pride and Prejudice,
Mhm.
in that the plot beats of the middle are very Emma, but a lot of the characters are like Charlotte is kind of just Charlotte from Pride and Prejudice, but like
Mhm.
with other plot points. Like the ending is more like the ending of Pride and Prejudice, and also just stuff I made up. The beginning has quite a lot of like stuff that's from like Anne Lister's biographies that I was quite
Mhm.
interested in. Um, so and it has quite a lot of little things where bits of the dialogue are like from a completely different Austen book, or almost every character is like at least one Austen character squidged together, in a way that is like not necessarily like supposed to be picked up on. But I think it was fun to be able to be a bit more creative than like a straightforward
Yeah.
retelling would be, because I think it's already such a big change to be talking about sort of different themes than what the original Emma is. And I think you can, for me, it was easier to like bring that out better by being like, I'm gonna put in everything that I want. I'm trying to talk about this. Here's an interesting thing I read.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think I I love like a retelling, but it was really fun to kind of not really know what was kind of like come next.
Mm,
Like it wasn't kind of like I knew the beats that all these characters were going to have. It was like fun to kind of just not know exactly what the journey was going to be for each character. I was also going to ask you, I feel guilty reading Anne Lister's diaries. Do you?
um, I don't know. Like
Personal question.
there, there's like so, as in because it's someone else's diaries, it's because it's really
Yeah.
personal.
And it was like in code
Um,
and all that.
yeah, but there's also like 4 million words of it, and she like hid it in wall panels so it survived. And I'm like, do you write that much without thinking that maybe someone is gonna read
Yeah.
it? I feel like she was like a real like personality, and so it
Mm.
doesn't feel that. Maybe I'm just like justifying myself completely because like who knows? But like it sort of feels a little bit like I don't know. I kind of feel like maybe she would be pleased to be like famous and like have
I do
TV
agree.
adaptations.
I think like in the context of today, I think she would be like super pleased with herself. I mean, I think obviously she would be super pleased with herself. Like, I don't know. I guess like it's not like she was like, oh, I hope people don't think I'm subversive. But like I don't know. I think I always feel weird about reading people's diaries. Always. Like,
Hmm.
and that's probably just a me problem. I had an event with somebody once who does like amazing readings of like sexy letters. And it was really funny because we were doing an event together and I was like, well, my book is barely sexy at all. Sorry. I was like, they write letters, but they're just like flirty, you know? Uh,
Hmm.
And I just was like, I feel a little bit guilty about reading other people's like private sexy letters out loud, but I guess they've been dead for hundreds of years, so I don't really know
I
what
think maybe it's that is a thing. It's like the difference of time. I think also
Mm,
partly I'm like, if I had a really personal diary, but it was like, when I'm dead, I'm dead. Like
true.
I'm not gonna be around to be. Yeah, I guess I just hadn't really thought about it that way.
I'm also kind of like, I guess you would like burn if you were like, this cannot ever see the light of day, you would, but I mean,
Also, everyone burnt their stuff,
yeah. Oh,
right? Like
exactly. So
that's
like
a
they
big
knew it was
reason
an
about like
option.
we don't have like queer history.
Yeah.
There's is it Aubrey Beardsley or someone where his final words were like burn all the indecent poems and drawings? Because even someone people that were really like I mean basically very like openly queer with their friendship circles in their
Mm,
lives didn't want to have that there to be like a knock-on effect for their families, which there kind of
yeah.
would be if all of this stuff came out. So I think it's really interesting when you hear stories like that or you find like there's like fragments of things that are left over that it's really difficult not to see that. I think E.M. Forster in a letter, probably a private letter, was like, there's a great unrecorded history. And I think it's really like easy to imagine that when you look at queer
Yeah.
history is how much more stuff is there. Like if, and I think that's particularly true of like Anna's diary. So you're like, if she was able to do all this stuff, a lot of stuff. Really, before I read any biographies, I'd seen stuff that was like, oh, she's like the lesbian Casanova. And I was like, okay, I get it. You want me to read this book. And when I read it, I was like, oh no, all right. There was like no exaggeration there.
No,
Yeah.
not at all. Um, I love that you included like a section on your research and kind of like the books that you read, especially because a lot of it lined up with mine. I was just sitting there nodding, like, yes, you're so right. And I'm
Yeah.
so right. Was there kind of anything in particular that stood out for you, like in your research that was like unexpected or like anything that kind of that you remember being surprised by at all?
Yeah, so much of it. I didn't really study British history at school. I didn't do literature. I really didn't know very much about the era, and I think I was surprised by how much queer history we have records of, and I was surprised, maybe not surprised, but I think my sort of sense of the British past was like, oh, there were like one or two people who weren't white, and that was it. And I think a lot of people have that idea in their heads, and
Yeah.
to sort of know more about like not just like we kind of think, but we have whole records about like black communities in London at that time was
Mhm.
something that I think sometimes a lot of the stuff in that history bit, I was reading it and I was like, why didn't I know this? Why doesn't everyone know this? I need to tell everyone about a lot of this stuff. Um, yeah, I was also really excited to get to do it. I I didn't think the publishers would let me for some reason. I was like, I'm gonna sneak in my history research because I love it when other historical fiction does that. And then like basically everyone I ever talked to was like, we love the history section. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
oh, I didn't know. It's enabling. I want to do more next time.
I thought it was great. I'm gonna get to some questions from readers in a second because I feel like I've been yapping at you for way too long. Um, I wanted to ask you, like, what is there anything coming up next for you? Do you know what you're doing next?
Right?
Are you allowed to talk about
Yes.
it? If you're not, you don't have to say
I have
anything.
no idea if I'm allowed to talk about it. I have a lot of things cooking and they are none of them announced and they vary from like in revisions to talking to publishers to done, ready.
Mhm.
I just need to announce it. Um, so I don't know what I can talk about. I have another game book which is a queer vampire romance, which I think I've been talking about quite publicly already. So if that's a secret, it's too late. Um, which is really fun. I definitely do have dreams. I would really like to do something else set in this time period that kind of digs in a bit more to some of the themes that I was looking at already and thinks about trans history. And um, I really loved getting to do a rom-com in this setting, but I would also like next love to do something really like devastatingly romantic. Um, yeah, and also I am a ship nerd, so I would like there to be a little bit of I think that thing of like the lens. I think for this book, I wanted to open it up a little bit from what you might get in like a Jane Austen book. And I'd like to do that more and look at like other bits, other things that are happening in this time period. but it's still feeling like the romance is like the central part of it.
Yes. Well, that sounds very exciting. You have lots of irons in the fire, let's just say. Um, so now I'm going to get to some questions from readers. The first one's actually from Catherine Woodfine. So there you go. Would love to hear you about you taking inspiration from Jane Austen and Emma specifically, which we've kind of covered, but then what kind of drew you to this particular novel, and do you have any favorite Austen adaptations slash retellings?
So what drew me to, I think I quite like that Emma Sarks. That's interesting
I
to
love that
me.
thing.
Yeah. I think that's also something that I really like about the books of yours that I've read is that some of the main characters are just like messy and I'm like, yes, this
Unlikable.
is what I want. Yeah, and I think that that's like real, and I think there's something about being able to step into the shoes of any character of any kind that like is also just like doing things that they know are bad, because I just think that's like real life, and I think if you can't admit to that in yourself, that's probably denial. I think probably everyone is messing up sometimes. Um, Particularly Emma, there's like a page of it that I really remember rereading in like 2018, which is like the beginning of me wanting to do this, which is it's the description of her her old governess has left, and so she's like, oh, I'm gonna get a new best friend. It's Harriet Smith. And it's the description of her is literally like her soft blue eyes were so entrancing. Her figure was exactly the vibe that I'm into. I'm paraphrasing, but only just. It's really like a whole page of describing how like she was exactly my type. And when I looked it up, there's like a million queer readings, particularly of Emma, of this particular relationship. And I think I was like, oh, Austen's out of copyright. Like I could, my dream of like, what if Mr. Darcy was trans is like, that's a thing that I could just do
Mhm.
like in a book.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I think I also really like, talking about favorite adaptations, I really like the 2009 BBC Emma, which has, do you not know how to say this actor's name? Romola Garai? The person who's Emma has like the goofiest, most expressive face. And it's really interesting to have this really modern body language in like a
Mm.
very historically adaptation. And the main boy is Johnny Lee Miller, and they're like very bickering chemistry in a way that I was like, it's so fun. It felt at the time very like fresh and modern, but still being really grounded on all this language and setting and the plot staying quite close to the original. I could
No.
probably talk about favorite adaptations for a long time. I
I
like
would get
both
in
the
trouble with mine,
90s.
so.
Oh,
Well, it's just because I like the
what's your
2005 Prime. I'm sorry.
oh,
Like
okay.
I love both, but I think like a film that is shot entirely at golden hour, designed to make me cry, like that makes me happy. And like I love the new Emma as well. The Autumn to Wild Emma. Like
Mhm.
just I think I also watched it when I was on submission with my first Regency novel. And so it's a very
So you were in
particular
there.
time in my life where I was like, very tightly wound
Yeah.
about like, will my books sell? Will I ever be
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
an author? And then I saw this Emma adaptation and I was just like, this is amazing. And I want this life for myself, not being Emma, but
Yeah, okay. I'm not gonna get too deep on my opinions. I'm gonna try my best. Um, when I was like 12 or whatever, when the Noise Pride and Prejudice came out, I was an insufferable person. So I was like, "Ugh, this is nothing like the book.
Well,
This
it's
is
true.
nowhere near as good as the 90s one." And then I watched it again like 5 years ago, and I was like, oh, this is good.
I
This
mean,
one's
listen,
actually really
it's
good.
good. It's enjoyable. It's like, I don't know. It just brings me. So sorry, I've just been brought a sandwich. Um, I'm living a very glamorous life. People just bring me sandwiches sometimes. No, it's just my partner. Anyway, the point is that I think they serve different purposes. Like I think that different adaptations serve,
Exactly, yeah.
and like
My
sometimes.
favorite character
No, you go.
I was only going to say my favorite character of the Naughty's Pride and Prejudice is like the big tree, or that shot of like the lake with the like birds coming across it, or the shot where the camera's going like in and out of the house
Yeah.
is very beautiful.
The one
Um,
they do a couple of long shots and those they always make me cry.
yeah,
Just the fact of it being
yeah,
like a one take, like well, one take, who knows, but like
and
long
then the
shot.
music is good.
Oh
Yeah,
God,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, and like that's a completely different thing to like a faithful adaptation of a book that kind of like feels really like grounded in the material and like in the time period and stuff.
Yeah, I also really like that both the 90s and the noughties one have this a sort of very like horny, wet in the rain in a lake
Yeah.
scenes. Like the 90s one is really accurate apart from like lake scene.
Yeah.
Completely
They just had
random.
to get him a little down.
Originally, the original person who made it, he wanted him to be Mr. Darcy to be naked for that scene, and then they were like, "Oh, I guess we won't do that." It's a really funny piece of trivia that I'm like, that's being into the vibe, which I
Yeah.
respect. Yeah.
They're like, well, why would he be like, let him be naked anyway?
If it didn't happen already, like, do whatever.
Like what? Like I don't know. Let people be naked. So to move on to another question.
This is just completely not relevant to this like YA book that I'm talking about. I just think
Yeah.
that things should be able to get really wild and really deep into
Yes,
their
I think
niche. I
everything
think
should,
that's fun.
yeah, dial it up to 11 in all kind of scenarios, especially when you're like in such a like heightened space where everything
Mm.
is like very dramatic, very emotional, very romantic, like just anyway. Um, Letty asks, your work has so much depth and thought in the fashion and costumes, and I'm curious as to how you tackle this in a period romance. In Regency, there's both a greater agency and creativity in fashion as it's expected people will make and alter their clothing or to order it custom tailored, but at the same time, there's much more gender and class restriction in what's acceptable to wear. How did this setting inform your character designs and fashion choices? This is an excellent question. I wish I had asked this
This
question.
is a great big question.
Yeah, very
I've
large
forgotten
academic question.
forgotten the beginning part of it now. Yeah. I don't know if you know Kaz Rowe, who's a YouTuber who makes like historical video essays, and I think is based on like the West Coast. But Kaz makes webcomics, so I know them, and I was like, please help me. Kaz was a consultant on the costumes and some of the historical, like sort of queer historical stuff at the beginning, which was really helpful for me getting a clearer picture. Um, I was really interested in, things like the ladies of Llangollen, who were
Mhm.
like famous lesbians at the time, wore steel skirts, but like out kind of outdated like top hats and like men's like jackets and stuff. And so it was really interesting to look at like what queer people are actually wearing in this time period. I definitely did think about how many dresses do these people own, because I think the reality is like not very many.
Mhm.
So I think Eleanor has the most like costume changes. Um yeah, I don't know if this is really answering like the exciting nuance of that question, but it was really fun to like look through just a lot of fashion plates and be like, that is a George jacket. Like each, like occasionally finding something that I was like, this is perfect for this character. I
Yeah.
definitely had very big sort of reference boards, and some of those are referenced more closely from real fashion plates. Something about I personally don't love the like middle chemistry of the 2020 Emma, but it's so much of the visuals is really carefully like referenced so that I would be watching it and be like, I know what jacket you're copying when
Yeah.
you're doing that because I have copied that jacket, which
Mm.
is I think really fun.
It is very fun. I love that stuff. I think like Emma is one of those not to talk about it again because you know just because I love it we can fight about it later. Um I think that's one of those ones where people would be really surprised to find out how much was accurate because some of the stuff in that adaptation feels like too outlandish or like
It
it doesn't
looks
line up.
wild, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it doesn't line up with what people imagine. And you're like, no, this is like actually very accurate.
Yeah.
um, I'm gonna try and get through a couple more questions because there are so many great questions.
Sorry.
No,
I
no,
don't
it's
know what
not.
to say about everything.
It's good. We love that. Listen, better that than an event where I go, how did you start art? And you were like, I just did. End of question.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
um, so Katrina asks, often when it comes to stories in historical settings, there are people who deny that queer and trans people existed in those times, or that it's like a modern phenomenon, or unrealistic, which is also untrue. What role do you think books and media like I Shall Never Fall in Love and similar titles that focus on these subjects within historical settings play towards changing people's perceptions about queerness in history? We kind of discussed it a little.
Um,
It's a great question.
Yeah. I think I like the idea of people, maybe this isn't happening, but people coming into this book being like, oh, cool, a Regency romance, and reading it through being like, okay, I guess it's just like making stuff up, and get to the end and then bam, I'm gonna tell you about the queer history.
Yeah, I love that.
Um, yeah, I think it's such a like, it's kind of a genre in and of itself, and I definitely like the idea that it's quite approachable, but also sort of has some stuff like if you want to go and read more, we actually do know all of this stuff about it,
Mhm.
about the real time. Um, yeah, and
No.
I kind of just think that like so much of the like anti-trans rhetoric, but also like to some extent like anti-immigrant rhetoric, which is not exactly the same, but I think sort of analogous in ways, is so predicated on this assumption that well it didn't used to be like that. This is
Yeah.
new. Like Britain didn't used to have like like didn't used to have queer people. This is a new like thing that's never happened before. It's unnatural, all of this stuff. And I think that like um I think that having that clearer picture of history makes I think it just sort of undermines these sort of very general ideas, that sort of general misinformation that can end up like floating around as people's sort of vague sense of like, I don't know, like what the British Empire was like. What is, there's such a strong idea of like, oh, well, racism happened in America, right? Or that like, well, trans people were invented in 2005. And I think that it's important and it's like the roots of so much oppression today has such a it's a direct through line. It's like an exact line from now to 1800s
Mhm.
um Britain. I think it's really interesting to see how much of the sort of struggles politically going on then are like this is stuff that we're still having to talk about now, even if it's in a bit of a different way.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why I loved that you had that research section at the end, because I think a lot of the time I desperately want to do the same thing and have and reach the end of this book and people, because I get a lot of people saying, well, obviously this is kind of like unrealistically diverse, or like nobody would really feel this way about like having a queer child in the Regency or whatever. And you so badly just want to like get in there and be like, actually, you're wrong. This is the bit
Yeah,
I've researched.
I was also interested in it, right? Because like when I was like really young, I didn't know that queer people, other queer people existed. Like I had my own strong feelings about my own like gender. I definitely was like crushing on girls before I knew it was like a thing that anyone else in the world had like experienced.
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, if that's me, and there's a whole history of like human civilization, like how could it like possibly be the case that anyway, it
Uh,
makes a lot of sense to me. And I think people are just sometimes just like not good at imagining other people are just having different experiences from them. And that's
yeah,
just but that doesn't make it not a real thing that's happening.
definitely. I think that's quite a nice note to end this on, as we've been rambling on, but delightfully. I've enjoyed listening to you speak. I don't know what my rambles were. I at one point was just drawing a horse in the air for a while. So maybe I'm gonna end this chat and go and see if I can draw a horse. And I'll send you a picture of the horse that
I
I
mean,
draw.
I wouldn't recommend it, but I do want to see the picture.
I'm
So
like, I need you to draw a horse. I mean, you have, this is the thing, but I'm like, yeah, but you were edited, you had the chance to redo it.
I had my one of my friends who can draw horses as a horse consultant.
Oh
Thank
my
you.
God. Well, there you
Who's in the
go.
back of the book. And
Why would you not have?
I was like, would this happen with the horse? And they were like, no. I was like, okay, changing it.
Would this happen with the horse? Is this what a horse would think in this scenario? What would the horse?
I had the horse like kicking or something because I don't know. I've seen a horse, but
Yeah, we've all seen a
I don't really
horse, but
know what they're about. So thank you to everyone who was more of an expert in their own field that I asked about everything in this book.
I love that. Thank you so much to Lighthouse for hosting us. As you heard at the beginning, we are huge fans of Lighthouse, and thank you to everybody for watching, and thank you, Harry, for joining me on this beautiful square online on the
It was so
thank
nice to talk to you. Yeah, thank you.
you too. Bye. That was my fake goodbye. Did you like
Good.
it?